Welcome back. And now for the news in detail. Turkey says it will retaliate against any move to thwart its efforts to fight terrorism. The Turkish Foreign Ministry said this in response to the announcement of possible U.S. sanctions on Ankara. U.S. President Donald Trump issued a new executive order authorizing the U.S. Treasury Department to draft significant new sanctions against Ankara. But Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin has expressed hope that the U.S. would not have to enforce the curbs on Turkey's economy. He said the prospective punitive measures could target any person associated with the Turkish government. Turkey says military operation would continue till a 30-kilometer border security zone is established. The death toll from Kurdish and ISIS militants from the Turkish operation in northern Syria has risen to 415. A statement issued by the Defense Ministry says the overnight land and air assaults were conducted successfully at the border. The ministry has confirmed the first death of a Turkish soldier since the launch of Operation Peace Spring. It said 14 villages have been liberated from the terrorists in northern Syria. The ministry rejected claims that the Turkish army had targeted U.S. troops. Meanwhile, the UN said about 100,000 people have fled their homes following the operation. In a report, the bloc said many people are sheltering in schools or other buildings in Haseke city and the town of Tal Tamir. Turkey has launched Operation Peace Spring to secure its borders by eliminating militants and to ensure safe return of Syrian refugees. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan has expressed complete support to Turkey over the ongoing counter-terror operation in northern Syria. In a phone call with Turkey's President Tayyip Erdogan, PM Khan said Pakistan understands Ankara's concerns on terrorism. PM Khan said Islamabad hopes Ankara's efforts for enhanced security and peaceful resolution of Syrian situation are fully successful. He said after losing 70,000 lives due to terrorism, Pakistan is fully aware of the threats being faced by Turkey. The Prime Minister said Pakistan is looking forward to Erdogan's forthcoming visit to the country later this month. Meanwhile, a car bomb explosion has killed 3 civilians in Syria's northeastern Qamishli district. ISIS militants claimed the responsibility for the attack. Kurdish forces said 9 others were wounded in the attack. They said ISIS militants have increased their activities in the region. The SDF said 5 ISIS militants broke out of a prison in Qamishli. Meanwhile, the UN says 100,000 people have left their homes in northeastern Syria. The US and China have struck an interim deal to defuse their year-long trade war, which has threatened to derail global economic growth. After 2 days of talks in Washington, Vice Premier Liu He agreed to double China's purchases of the US agricultural products. In return, President Donald Trump postponed the imposition of enhanced US tariffs on Chinese imports. More on this breakthrough in this report.
After 2 days of intense negotiations in Washington, US and Chinese trade representatives have put together a mini trade deal. US President Donald Trump had been pushing for an all-encompassing agreement, but he changed his mind after Chinese Vice Premier Liu agreed to make key concessions. China has agreed to sharply increase its purchases of American food and other agricultural products to between $40 to $50 billion a year. Beijing has also promised to open its financial services sector to wholly US-owned firms and address Washington's concerns about currency manipulation. Talking to reporters at the White House, Trump signaled a change of tone in US ties with China.
There was a lot of friction between the United States and China, and now it's a love fest. That's a good thing, but that's good for China and it's good for us, but it's good for the world.
Relations between the US and China have deteriorated significantly since trade talks broke down in May. The trade tensions also threatened to drag the global economy into recession. But the bonhomie between President Trump and Vice Premier Liu should reassure investors and governments around the world.
I think the relationship in certain ways may be better than it's ever been. We've been through a very tough negotiation. There's never been a negotiation like this. In all fairness, I give China tremendous credit because for 25 or 30 years, they've done very well with the U.S., and now we're doing something jointly.
President Trump says he hopes to sign the interim trade agreement with his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping at the Asia-Pacific Economic Forum in Chile next month.
In Tamil Nadu, 2 days of talks between China's President Xi Jinping and Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi have concluded without any agreement on substantive issues. Instead, Indian and Chinese officials said the two leaders focused on reducing bilateral tensions, which spiked into the lead-up to the informal summit. The Indian media had expected Xi to raise the issue of India's revocation of occupied Kashmir's special constitutional status on August the 5th. China endorsed Pakistan's position on Kashmir during the visit of Prime Minister Imran Khan to Beijing earlier this week. But Indian Foreign Secretary Vijay Gokhale told reporters that the Kashmir issue was not discussed. He said that Chinese and Indian delegations had prioritized the improvement of trade ties. We are joined now by Indus correspondent Rebecca Bunton, who has been covering the summit from nearby the city of Bengaluru. Rebecca, thank you for joining us. And from the remarks made by Chinese President Xi Jinping and Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, it is apparent that the two leaders spent much of the last 2 days trying to diffuse bilateral tensions. Has there been any real progress regarding this?
Well, the thing with the informal summit is that we don't actually get to hear a lot of what actually went on there, and we haven't seen a series of announcements that have come out from this, and that's very much what was expected, because the informal talks mean that it's sort of free in nature, and the leaders are free to talk about the topics that they choose. Of course, it started yesterday, continued until today, and it's wrapped up. We understand from the Foreign Secretary that issues such as trade were very much in focus. Border issues between China and India, the sense from him was that there has been quite a lot of peace and tranquility, and that's something that the leaders are also looking to boost. One indication that things perhaps did go quite well between the two leaders was the fact that they've already made the announcement that there will be a third informal summit. The first one, of course, took place last year, and they've announced that there will be a third one, and Modi has accepted that invitation from the Chinese president, and that will take place next year in China.
Rebecca, the two leaders were expected to discuss India's revocation of the special constitutional status of Kashmir. Did they discuss that?
Again, yes, that was something mentioned by the Indian Foreign Secretary when he addressed the media after the talks, and he said that Kashmir was not discussed at all. It just wasn't brought up, which in some ways is quite surprising, but it was understood that the two leaders might want to minimize discussion of that topic and instead focus on other areas such as trade, tourism as well was something that came up. So they really wanted to concentrate on improving these bilateral relations between the two countries and trying to improve economic cooperation and so on.
Rebecca, Indian Foreign Secretary Vijay Gokhale has told reporters that Modi and Xi Jinping agreed to measures encouraging balanced trade and investment. Please update us regarding that one as well.
Well, we don't have too many details on that yet. What the Foreign Secretary in India talked about was some kind of trade mechanism that they've agreed upon to balance trade, but the details of that are really not yet known and perhaps have to be kind of thrashed out later. He also mentioned that with these informal summit talks, they tend to set the direction for what's going to happen next and pave the way for things to happen. But he has said there has been this agreement about some kind of trade mechanism, and that's very important to India in particular, given the fact that it is quite concerned about the trade deficit between the two countries, and it's quite worried about the amount of goods coming in into China. A lot lot of companies here are concerned about that because it impacts their own business. So India's long been looking to balance trade with China, and of course this comes against the backdrop of trade wars between US and China, and China of course also looking to strengthen and improve trade, investment and economic relations with India. So we'll have to wait to see what happens with this and the full details on exactly what measures will be taken.
Thank you, Rebecca. Moving on, Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan will tomorrow travel between Tehran and Riyadh in a bid to defuse tensions in the Gulf. PM Khan last month agreed to undertake mediation efforts after being asked by Iran's President Hassan Rouhani and Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. For more on this story, we are joined by our Islamabad correspondent, Isa Naqvi. Isa, what can you tell us about Prime Minister's forthcoming visit to Tehran and Riyadh?
Although there is not an official announcement of this trip, but the official sources at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Islamabad and also the Prime Minister's Secretariat have confirmed that Prime Minister Imran Khan will tomorrow leave for Tehran first, where he'll hold a meeting with President Hassan Rouhani, and later in the evening he'll fly to Riyadh, where he is expected to have a meeting with the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. And all of this is being done after he has had meetings with President Trump, Hassan Rouhani on the sidelines of the United Nations General Assembly session in New York. And before going there, he has had a meeting with MBS Mohammed bin Salman in Riyadh. And apparently this schedule, which has not been announced yet, will be confirmed tomorrow when Prime Minister leaves for Tehran.
Isa, as we have seen in the past, Pakistan has tried to diffuse tensions between both of these countries, but with very limited success. How optimistic is the government that the Prime Minister Imran Khan could make a breakthrough this time around?
I have spoken with the officials at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and in the government as well, and they are hopeful that this time around it is different from last 4 efforts. At least at 4 times in the past, Pakistan had tried to mediate between Iran and Saudi Arabia, but that could not make its headway because one of the parties actually did not want such a mediation between these 2 countries. But this time around, it seems, the officials say that this time around, it seems that both Iran and Saudi Arabia are in agreement that a role can be played by Pakistan, and that was evident after Prime Minister's visit to Riyadh last month, and later he went to attend the United Nations General Assembly session where he has had meetings with President Trump and Hassan Rouhani. And the fact that this visit has been lined up where he's going to go to Tehran first and then Riyadh, that means that Iran and Saudi Arabia have actually agreed that Pakistan can and Prime Minister Imran Khan can play a mediator's role between these 2 countries. And the sources, they also claim that if there is a breakthrough or a positive outcome of the first 2 meetings, then after Riyadh, before coming to Islamabad, Prime Minister Imran Khan may may have a small stopover at Tehran on his way back, and can further continue with how to take or how to carry along with this mediation process.
Thank you, Isa Naqvi, our Islamabad correspondent, updating us regarding the forthcoming visit of Prime Minister Imran Khan to Tehran and Riyadh to diffuse the tensions between the 2 countries. Moving on now, the US has announced deployment of 3,000 more troops to strengthen Saudi Arabia's defense after last month's attack on its oil facilities. Pentagon says Washington will also send 2 Patriot batteries and a terminal high-altitude area defense system to Saudi Arabia. Officials say the kingdom requested the additional forces.
In response to continued threats in the region, I've ordered the deployment to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia of 2 additional fighter squadrons and supporting personnel, along with additional Patriot and THAAD air and missile defense batteries. Taken together with other deployments I've extended or authorized within the last month, this involves about 3,000 United States forces.
Welcome back. Australia, in cooperation with Fiji, will send troops to the Middle East on a peacekeeping mission in coming weeks. Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison said the troops will be deployed to the UN-controlled Golan Heights between Syria and Israel. During a two-day official visit to Fiji, PM Morrison said Australian troops will go to Syria for training. He said the court deployment will begin as soon as the UN processes and approvals were finalized. Australia's Defence Ministry spokeswoman said the deployment is not related to current events in northern Syria. "49 Palestinians have been wounded as the Israeli forces fired live bullets and rubber-coated rounds along the Gaza border. Health Ministry said dozens of Palestinians sustained inhalation from tear gas fired by the Israeli forces. Israeli forces have killed 310 Palestinians and 18,000 others have been injured since the outbreak of the weekly protests in March 2018. The Great March of Return protests have called for lifting the Israeli blockade of the Gaza Strip. The Modi administration has barred a Press Council of India's delegation from visiting occupied Kashmir. A 4-member fact-finding mission was scheduled to start a 5-day visit to the valley today. Citing security reasons, the government of Indian-occupied Kashmir cancelled the Press Council's tour at the last moment. The Occupied States Information Department has asked the Press Council of India to postpone its delegation's visit till next month. By then, the state government would have relocated from restive Srinagar to Jammu for the winter. This contrasts sharply with the Indian government's announcement on Thursday that occupied Kashmir is open for tourists despite the clampdown. India's curfew and the communications blackout in occupied Kashmir has now entered its 69th day. India-imposed occupied Kashmir state government has burst its own claim of normalcy in the valley with a newspaper ad asking Kashmiris to resume their usual routines. In the ad, the government admits life in the valley is not normal. Advocating for Article 370 revocation, ad reads the people of Kashmir have been misled over the special status. The view in the ad propagates people of the valley themselves have decided not to resume their normal lives. The propaganda piece has totally ignored the complete clampdown and the communications blackout in occupied territory. Pakistan, Iran, Afghanistan and UN High Commissioner for Refugees have agreed to take forward a strategy for Afghan refugees' repatriation. The agreement was reached at an informal session at Geneva on sidelines of the 70th session of the Executive Committee of the High Commissioner's Program. In the meeting, quadripartite decides to remove shortcomings in Afghan refugees' management and their voluntary return. It was also agreed to form the support platform with additional players expected to contribute for both the host and home countries. Session was attended by Pakistan's Minister for Narcotics Control, Shahryar Afridi, Iran's Interior Minister Abdul Raza Fazli, as well as Afghan Refugees and Repatriation Minister Syed Hussain Alami Balkhi and UNHCR Regional Director. A Brexit deal is in sight after Britain's Prime Minister Boris Johnson backed down on the issue of border customs posts for Northern Ireland. EU officials say Johnson has indicated that he is prepared to make sufficient concessions to allow detailed talks to begin. More in this report.
After months of deadlock, the next 48 hours are expected to be crucial for Britain's exit from the European Union. Over this weekend, British negotiators will seek to seal a deal based on a revised draft submitted by Brexit Secretary Steve Barclay. The ice was broken during last-ditch talks on Thursday between the British Prime Minister and Irish leader. At those talks, Johnson performed a U-turn on his insistence that customs posts be established along the border between Northern Ireland and the Irish Republic. European Council President Donald Tusk said there were good signs that a deal on Brexit can be reached.
Yesterday, when the Irish Taoiseach and the UK Prime Minister met, they both saw, for the first time, a pathway to a deal. I have received promising signals from the Taoiseach that a deal is still possible. Technical talks are taking place in Brussels as we speak.
Prime Minister Boris Johnson has refrained from commenting on whether Northern Ireland will leave the EU customs union or not. To get a deal done, Johnson must master the complexities of the Irish border before getting the approval of Europe's biggest powers.
Let's let our negotiators get on. I think where Leo Varadkar and I got to yesterday was a joint feeling that there is a way forward. We can see a pathway to a deal. That doesn't mean it's a done deal, so there's work to be done.
The Prime Minister will ask Parliament to back any Brexit deal he secures from the EU within 24 hours of the European summit next week. French President Emmanuel Macron and German Chancellor Angela Merkel are set to meet in Paris tomorrow to discuss the Brexit breakthrough.
Well, North Korea has asked Japan to pay compensation for its fishing boat that sank when it collided with a patrolling vessel earlier this week. North Korea's foreign ministry said the collision was a deliberate act by Japan. In a statement, the ministry said that Tokyo will have to face consequences if such incidents occur in future. Pyongyang refuted Japan's claim that the accident occurred after a North Korean boat took a sharp turn. Japanese authorities have said the boat was illegally fishing in their exclusive economic zone. Earlier this week, Japanese Coast Guard rescued 60 North Koreans from a fishing boat. In India, the government data has shown a decline of 1.1% in industrial output in the month of August. The manufacturing sector, which contributes over 77% to industrial sector, showed a drop of 1.2% in output. The manufacturing sector grew by 5.2% in the same month last year. The index of industrial production growth during April to August is 2.4%, down from 5.3% in the period last year. Earlier, the credit rating agency Moody's slashed its economic growth forecast for India for the second time in 3 months. Moody's Investor Service predicted India's GDP would expand by 5.8% in the ongoing fiscal year, down from its earliest forecast of 6.2%. And now the weather situation from around the globe. And that's all for now. Further updates, stay tuned to Indus.